Is America currently fighting an undeclared World War III right here on U.S. soil? A war to protect its Judeo-Christian foundations from radical legal and political movements?
That's precisely the narrative. It's a powerful, and I'd say high-stakes story that we're seeing just dominate conservative political discourse right now.
And these aren't just discussions about policy changes, are they?
Not at all. The leaders and commentators we're looking at, they view this moment as an existential defense of Western civilization itself.
That really sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're unpacking a whole stack of sources a listener sent over, someone who's clearly, deeply concerned about what they see as these fundamental challenges to the laws and the identity of the United States.
Right. So our mission here is to really understand the gravity of this struggle as it's being framed by these sources. It's an ideological war, they say, rooted in judicial challenges and, maybe most critically, what they call the aggressive importation of Sharia law.
And the urgency it's almost overwhelming in this material.
Oh, absolutely. The urgency is palpable. I mean, if you just follow the news coming out of a state like Texas, the political action is intense. You have major state leaders declaring very publicly, enough is enough.
And they're not just talking, they're making concrete moves.
Concrete moves. To formally designate organizations like CARE, that's the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations.
And it seems like this is a coordinated movement. It's pushing for a campaign to, formally ban Sharia law nationwide.
That's the goal. And these political figures, they frame this whole struggle as defending what they call a liberal republic in the classical sense.
Meaning a nation that was, in their view, blessed and uniquely successful because it was founded on Judeo-Christian principles.
Exactly. And that very foundation, they insist, is now under a coordinated effort to be destroyed from within.
So let's unpack that core argument, because it all really hinges on defining a very specific threat. What are these sources pointing to as the ideological weapon being used against the Constitution?
The primary threat they define is a coordinated effort to bring Sharia law into our country. And the concern isn't really about personal faith.
It's about the legal system.
Oh, it's about the legal system. The explicit goal they believe these groups hold is to, and this is their word, supplant the United States Constitution with a different legal framework.
And the fear is that if that common set of American ideals is abandoned,
then the nation itself, as they put it, will no longer have a country.
This is where they start bringing in numbers, right, to try and quantify the danger.
Yes, exactly. They reference specific polling, including some Fox News investigations where they interviewed American Muslims, and they found what they describe as a significant number.
Sometimes even a majority in certain polls.
Right. A majority who expressed the belief that Sharia law should supersede the U.S. Constitution.
And they don't just stop at domestic polls. They use a global context to sort of amplify that fear.
They do. It's a key part of the argument. They highlight this widespread global data showing extremely high support for making Sharia the law of the land in many Muslim-majority countries. They repeatedly cite Afghanistan at 99% support and Pakistan at 84%.
So the argument is that this proves the ideological commitment to replace secular law with Sharia is deep-seated, and it's not just an American issue.
That's the idea, that it extends far beyond U.S. borders and is coming in with that same ideological weight.
Which brings up the critical constitutional question. Why is the practical application of Sharia seen as so fundamentally incompatible with the Bill of Rights? I mean, the Constitution guarantees religious freedom, after all.
The sources argue the conflict isn't just theoretical. It's about specific practical applications of Sharia law.
Okay, like what?
Well, the commentators detail things like relegating women and minorities to second-class status, strict punishments for abortion, and severe penalties for blasphemy. And then the ones they really focus on?
Let me guess. Capital punishment.
Yes. Capital punishment for apostasy, for leaving the faith, and capital punishment for homosexual acts.
And when you put those specific points up against the U.S. framework, things like equal protection, the Establishment Clause, freedom of speech,
the argument they make is that it's fundamentally at odds with everything the Constitution is meant to protect. They see no room for compromise there.
So to them, this isn't assimilation, it's invasion.
Precisely. Invasion via legal and cultural means.
Yeah.
The goal, they conclude, is to fundamentally transform the United States into something that it is not.
And this brings us right to the battle on the ground. When you define a threat in such existential terms, the political response becomes just as aggressive. And Texas is framed as the front line.
It is. The first big skirmish is focused on defending Judeo-Christian symbols in public spaces. Specifically, the display of the Ten Commandments on the grounds of the Texas Capitol.
For these sources, that monument isn't just a monument. It represents the acknowledgement of those founding principles we talked about.
And they feel incredibly confident in this particular fight. They note that the legal precedent was already set, and decisively, back when Greg Abbott was Attorney General.
Right. Ted Cruz was Solicitor General then, and they litigated and won this exact same case.
So they expect the Fifth Circuit to uphold that precedent. They see any new challenge as just pure judicial activism. But the fight over the monument isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, it's contrasted very heavily with what they call the double standard of the left.
Exactly. The argument is that while these activist judges are trying to tear down the Ten Commandments, other institutions are simultaneously eroding their own Judeo-Christian identity.
You mean through cultural changes?
Yes, through things like establishing Islamic prayer rooms in public schools. They cite a high-profile example, Liberty High School in Frisco ISD.
And the argument is
Right.
that this is a misinterpretation of the First Amendment?
A radicalized one, they'd say. One that invites ideological adversaries to destroy America by walking away from its founding principles.
This perceived destruction, then, leads to this really aggressive counter-response from politicians. Governor Greg Abbott has taken a very public stance.
A very hardline stance.
Yeah.
He issued this powerful proclamation saying enough is enough. And critically, he announced the specific intent to deem IRAR and the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations.
That's a huge political signal. It moves beyond just rhetoric.
It's targeted executive action against what they see as ideological networks.
Which leads us to Chip Roy. He's a congressman campaigning for Texas Attorney General, and he seems to be taking this idea of dismantling networks even further.
His plan is very detailed. He's talking about building specialized teams, essentially an investigative unit, just to look into the networks supporting Sharia implementation.
And his strategy?
His stated strategy is to follow the money and destroy that network. So it's not about debating ideas anymore. It's about defunding and legally neutralizing the opposition.
And this is where the rhetoric moves from a local fight to a national policy goal, the idea of formally banning Sharia law in the United States.
Yes, and Roy's reasoning for this, as cited in the source material, is incredibly stark.
What does he say?
His rationale is that those who come to the U.S. and do not assimilate, who don't show they love the flag, should ultimately not remain. It's an uncompromising stance, assimilation or rejection.
It's clear, then, why the commentators are framing this entire struggle, from a school prayer room all the way to a federal office campaign, as an undeclared World War III.
That framing is absolutely central to their worldview. They see this as a necessary war against existential threats. Islamism on one hand, and the internal subversion of American principles on the other. They see themselves as defending Western civilization.
And the internal part of that is just as important in these sources. They link the far left and the Democratic Party's move towards ideologies like socialism, fascism, and communism
to a singular desire for power, power they intend to use to tear the established country down.
What's really fascinating is the prediction they make about how those two forces, the internal and the external, will eventually interact.
It is. They predict that the Marxists, the far left, will eventually be consumed by the Islamists.
Why?
Because of the Islamists' stronger religious zeal. In their view, that zeal will always overpower a purely political ideology, which would leave the traditional West to fight the Islamists alone.
And the ultimate warning here is that if you abandon that Judeo-Christian foundation, you forfeit the country, and they keep pointing to Europe.
Constantly. Europe is held up as the cautionary tale. They say Europe is gone, that it's lost it, because its immigration policies have allowed other systems to overtake them.
The U.S. is the big apple.
The last big apple, they say, that must be saved before it falls to the same fate.
And this idea of internal threats isn't just about ideology, but also about institutions. They see judicial overreach as another tactic breaking down American stability.
A huge one. Their redistricting controversy in Texas is their prime example of judges improperly seizing legislative authority.
This gets a little complex, but the argument is that a ruling by a 2-to-1 panel of judges was what labeled really extraordinary.
It was. The dissenting judge, Jerry Smith, wrote what they call a scathing rebuke. He characterized the ruling as an extraordinary power grab, meant to ram this thing through politically before higher courts could step in.
And the judges justified it by claiming the state was engaging in racial gerrymandering.
That was the claim. But the political perspective in our sources argues the state was actually trying to undo previous racial gerrymandering.
So they see the ruling as a purely political exercise.
Precisely. They see the court usurping the power of the legislature. And in the context of our deep dive, this is seen as running parallel to the fights over the Ten Commandments. It's improper judicial authority accelerating the destruction of the republic's core structure.
So if we connect all this back, it's clear that whether the fight is over a monument, a political map, or the perceived infiltration of Sharia law, the overarching conviction is that judicial activism is a massive internal accelerant for this destruction.
That's the takeaway. The conversation really underscores this fundamental political conviction that the surface skirmishes over symbols and boundaries are just manifestations of a much larger, undeclared war for America's foundational identity.
The belief held by these conservative leaders is, it's intense. They genuinely seem to believe they're living in the 1930s of a new global conflict.
And they're issuing a serious warning that history will look back on this era as the beginning of a world war that people just haven't woken up to yet.
So, considering the aggressive steps we've outlined, using executive action against groups like CR, plans to dismantle networks, the push to formally ban Sharia law, you have to ask, does this political struggle, focusing so intensely on assimilation and foundational principles, mark a necessary pivot point? Is this, in their view, the last chance to prevent the U.S. from becoming that big apple that gets lost, just like they claim happened to Europe?
It's an ideological fight for the soul of the republic. And it's clear that those involved believe they are in the early undeclared stages of World War III.